So here, to begin with, we should think that for the benefit, for the sake of all sentient beings, we need to gain this state of perfect, complete enlightenment of Buddhahood. And in order to do that, we need to abandon harming others in any sort of way. We need to get rid of all harm to other sentient beings and benefit them however we may be able to. Because we want to, in the future, in our future lives, gain a good rebirth as a human or a god in order to be able to continue to practice, gaining again and again such a fortunate rebirth. But once we sort of realize that even gaining a good rebirth, we're still going to be subject to the sufferings of samsara, we recognize that this sense of I, this clinging and grasping to an I, and holding that as being more important than others, leads us to engage in activities based on our attachment and our aversion. And thus we accumulate karma, and that karma causes us to take rebirths in the future. And so we should recognize that we want to get out of that situation. And in order to do so, we need to meditate on selflessness, the lack of such an I that we hold on to so strongly. But even going beyond that, we look to our other mother and father sentient beings, and not just those who have acted in that capacity in this life, but recognizing that we have had countless rebirths in the past, life before life before life. And there's not a single being who hasn't been connected to us as a relative, as a friend. And in order to be able to accomplish their aims, to get them out of this ocean of samsara, we are going to then train in all of the trainings, the 6 perfections, such as generosity and ethics, patience, and so forth, in order to be able to attain this state of perfect enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so with that kind of thought process, we should set our motivation, realizing that we're listening to these teachings for that purpose. So as far as what we had gone over last time, we had talked about the kind of essence or the nature of this practice of serenity, as well as the objects that we can take for that meditation. So in terms of the sort of nature of this of serenity or calm abiding, we have so an object of meditation, whatever it may be. And when we are able to place our minds on that object for as long as we want, without getting distracted to any sort of external objects, this is what we characterize as serenity, particularly when one gains that ability to remain single-pointedly focused without any kind of distraction, as well as gaining a sort of blissfulness, appliancy of body and mind. So we're able to remain on that object for as long as we want without any sort of difficulty arising in terms of our body or our mind. And this kind of practice is really beneficial for the movement of the winds within the body and further practices related to Tantra and so forth. But this kind of stability of mind allows us to engage with an object in a way that we're not moving around, not getting distracted away from that. And again, this is not something that we accomplish immediately. We have the ability to sort of stay on an object for only a very short period of time. So we begin by, say, maybe staying for a minute or two, and we're lengthening that period that we're able to stay single-pointedly focused until we get to this point of achieving serenity. And whatever kind of object that we then take as our meditation, whether it is compassion or love or emptiness or anything else, is made much more powerful by having this kind of stability of mind.
Oh, yeah.
And then in terms of the nature of insight or sort of superior or special insight, this is something that we cannot achieve until we have first achieved the state of serenity. So within that state of serenity, that kind of stability, that mental stabilization, when one then investigates and analyzes an object, looking at does it exist inherently? Is there some kind of self? Is there some kind of true existence from its own side and so forth? That kind of examination or investigation within that state of serenity brings forth in a sort of superior kind of bliss and pliancy of body and mind, as well as understanding, a sort of strength of understanding that comes, that is brought forth from that kind of examination within the state of serenity. So often we translate this as just insight, but the first syllable in Tibetan is really like superior or sort of special, in that it brings about a superior kind of knowledge or insight, as well as this superior bliss and pliancy. So whatever we may be examining, whether it as impermanence or selflessness and so forth, the sort of strength of understanding that comes from examination within that state of serenity is what we refer to as special insight or insight. It's a superior kind of understanding, and it also brings about this kind of bliss and superior or extra kind of bliss and pliancy of body and mind.
Yeah.
So here, then going to the kind of objects that one takes for meditation. So going back to a quotation that we had earlier from the Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra. Here, when it comes to, sorry, just 1 second, this mind of, so here it says also from the Unraveling the True Intention Arya Sutra, Maitreya asks to the Buddha, how should people thoroughly search for serenity and gain expertise in insight? So how should one go about engaging with these practices? And so the Buddha then responds to Maitreya, talking about sort of what the various teachings are, what the kind of objects that we can take as in terms of our object of meditation. So generally we talk about there being 84,000 teachings, and those can sort of be summarized into these 12 branches that we went through. And then those could further be distilled into the 3 baskets. But taking those teachings as the object, one recognizes that they are all for the purpose of leading to emptiness, for bringing students to an understanding of emptiness. And so when it comes to how we approach these teachings, we should, as it says here in the quotation, bodhisattvas should properly listen to these teachings, remember their contents, and examine them mentally. So then they should continue to focus on them again and again until they gain some kind of understanding that comes from contemplation. And so once they then gain the kind of certainty that comes from individual reflection and contemplation, they then meditate on their object. So they take it to a sort of wisdom that arises from meditation by engaging in that in meditation again and again. And so here, in terms of the sort of 3 main objects that are mentioned here, we have first, again, recognizing that all of the teachings of the Buddha are leading to emptiness, or leading to an understanding of the ultimate reality. So as it says in the text, again, it says all of these, the fact that the 12 sets of scriptures, the sutras and so forth, can be summarized as all leading to suchness, that they will lead to suchness, and that they have led to suchness. So whatever the Buddha's teachings are, whether he's teaching about the 5 aggregates or the sort of 12 the sense bases and the sense consciousnesses, or the 18 constituents, including the objects of those, or whether he is teaching on impermanence and suffering and so forth, these teachings are all given for the purpose of eventually leading disciples to an understanding of ultimate reality. So we often see that there are different levels in terms of subtlety and coarseness, levels of selflessness that are taught. But in terms of looking at the kind of teachings that refute some kind of a permanent, singular, autonomous self, even when we have something like looking at impermanence, this is helping to move students towards an understanding of emptiness. Because when you recognize that things arise from causes, that sort of negates their having some sort of autonomous existence from their own side. So although an understanding of impermanence, or being based upon causes and conditions, doesn't cause one to arrive at the final ultimate understanding, it moves one closer to that. And so too, with the sort of refutation of a more coarse level of selflessness, we all sort of have this sense of there being a kind of self that is somehow apart from or separate from the aggregates. Like there is something inside of us that is permanent, that is lasting, and it's sort of singular. It's not dependent upon anything else, or sort of contingent upon anything else. It has this autonomy this ability to act in the way that it wishes. We have this sense that there is something, like if we were to set set aside our body, our mind, all of the five aggregates, that there would be this I or this self in there somehow. And this kind of teaching wherein we refute there being such a self, as if we could have some kind of self existing apart from the aggregates, setting aside our body and mind and all of the various aggregates, as if we could find some sort of self, that kind of understanding of gross or coarse selflessness helps one to then move towards the understanding of a more subtle selflessness, where we get into recognizing that all phenomena are not really truly established. They don't have any kind of existence from their own side, but are merely posited by mind. So here, this sort of understanding that all of the teachings of the Buddha are methods for arriving at or causing disciples to move closer to emptiness. This is the first of the sort of topics, three topics mentioned here. So all of the teachings of the Buddha, beginning with dependent origination, this is what the Buddha began with, teaching that what arises from causes and conditions, we would say is unarisen. It's not truly arisen because it is dependently originated. And so teaching in this way that all composite phenomena are dependent upon causes and conditions, this again helps lead us to this understanding of suchness. So here, recognizing that all composite phenomena are dependent upon causes and conditions, and so too is the self or the I. It's dependent upon the aggregates. It's not as though we can identify some sort of permanent, singular, autonomous I apart from the aggregates. If we set aside our body and mind and all of that, there's nothing we can point to as being the self, but rather we come to recognize through this teaching that the self is something which is designated on the basis of those aggregates, which is contingent upon or dependent upon that. So in this way, whatever sort of teachings the Buddha has given, and here again we say it's translated here as can be summarized as all leading to suchness, as in they are pointing us in that direction. They will lead to suchness. They will cause us to go there, and that they have led to suchness. So recognizing that all of the Buddhist teachings are for this purpose of coming to realize suchness, whether one does it sort of directly or it's leading there in stages. So here, then again, we had gone through that the sort of objects that one can take as an object of meditation and include the teachings of the Buddha summarized in these 12 branches, as well as taking things like the aggregates, the sense bases, and the various constituents, the objects of those as well. Or one could take the body of a Buddha as the object for actualizing serenity. And so here, one, as it was described above, begins by hearing the various teachings of the Buddha, then contemplating them, thinking about them, and then meditating on them. And one takes whatever is suitable as an object of meditation and seeks out serenity by placing the mind on that object, and doing so until one is able to remain single-pointedly focused for as long as one wishes, and brings forth this kind of bliss and pliancy of body and mind. And then within that state, when one has already achieved serenity, and within that then examines, so here, the second part of the quotation, so the first we have, this is how bodhisattvas properly seek serenity, by repeatedly engaging the mind until one gains this physical and mental pliancy and bliss. And then within that state, one investigates, looking at, is there any kind of true real existence? And when one gets to this kind of special understanding, again, using our cognitive faculties to completely investigate and thoroughly examine, when one then gains this kind of superior knowledge, this is what is known as insight, and thus bodhisattvas are skilled in the ways of insight. So here then, getting to where we had left off in the text, we're talking about the various objects here that are suggested for actualizing serenity. So it says the yogis who are interested in actualizing a serenity mind should initially concentrate closely on the fact that the 12 sets of scriptures, the sutras, melodious praises, and so forth, can be summarized as all leading to suchness, that they will lead to suchness, and that they have led to suchness. So again, this is the first of these objects, taking the teachings of the Buddha and recognizing that they are all leading to that ultimate reality. And then the second object here is next in the next paragraph, where it says, one way of doing this meditation is to set the mind closely on the mental and physical aggregates as an object that includes all phenomena. So the second object is then taking our aggregates, the sense bases and so forth, as well as the constituents. And then finally, there is the third object of taking the image of a Buddha. So here, when it comes to looking at our sort of mental and physical aggregates, when we think, when we have the sense of an I or a self, we have this sense of like a solid, singular sort of like, I don't know, the word that's here is like sort of like a pill, but I mean, it's like a sort of singular thing that is somehow separate from the body and the mind. But if we begin to investigate this, if we were to like set aside our form aggregate and set aside our mental aggregates, there's no self that can be found. So when we are trying to look for such a self, it seems as though it's like singular and permanent and has this sense of like autonomy, that it could act in the way that it wants. But when we really look at, well, what is the self, we look at the basis of designating the self, which is these 5 aggregates. And so at the most basic, this is looking at our mental and physical sort of aggregates. And when we begin to look at this, we see that there isn't just one sort of solid singular thing. We have our form, and then we also have our mental aggregates. We have our the aggregate of mental consciousness. But not only that, we are dominated, we are driven in many ways by our feelings, which is why this is mentioned as one of the primary aggregates of the 5 aggregates, is because when we have feelings, a sort of feeling of liking something, we are pursuing after our happiness. When we have a feeling of disliking something, we're trying to get rid of that feeling of suffering. So among, we have in various counts, like 51 different mental factors. The factor of feeling is really important because it's what causes us to sort of pursue our various feelings. I mean, it's what motivates us to then seek out happiness and to try to avoid suffering. And so then we have the aggregate of discernment, of it's sometimes called discrimination, but discernment that sort of says, well, this is this and this is that. So this is the kind of mental process that leads us to designate things as being good, as being something that we want and what we want to get, or something as being bad and our enemy, and so forth. And so these kind of various sort of factors that make up the person, we begin to see that there can't be something singular and sort of solid, because we have all of these various parts that constitute what we think of as the person. So all of the sort of non-mental and non-physical characteristics can be put in the category then of karmic formations, the sort of 4th or 5th aggregate, depending on how I'm counting here. But so here, when it comes to then our sort of mental our various mental processes, even when we begin to then look within consciousness and we look at all of our various sort of mental states that come about, even the mind is not sort of singular and static. We have all of our various sort of afflictions that can come up, the 6 root afflictions and the various other afflictions that are listed, as well as virtuous and non-virtuous minds. But as we begin to investigate this person that is designated on the basis of these 5 aggregates, we can see that there's no such like single solid thing as we have a sense that there is, but rather we have all of these various parts that are constantly changing and moving. There's no single self, because look at, we have our mind, our body, and within the mind, all of these various types of things like our feelings and discriminations and so forth. And there's also the fact that we are dependent upon causes and conditions. We might have a sense that we are sort of like a permanent person, but actually we are constantly changing. So this is the sort of way of doing the meditation to set the mind closely on the mental and physical aggregates as an object that includes all phenomena. So here, again, then when it says this meditation is to set the mind closely on the mental and physical aggregates as an object that includes all phenomena. So we have many sort of different kind of mental factors when we're looking at the aggregates here of a person. And here, so we have things like meditative stabilization and anger and jealousy and so forth. There are many different mental factors that we can identify. But feeling is specifically pointed out here or named as one of the 5 aggregates because of its importance in terms of sort of driving us in our behavior. All that we do is basically based upon wanting to have happiness and not wanting to suffer. We engage in virtuous and non-virtuous actions based upon that feeling, that desire to have happiness and the desire not to suffer. So maybe we harm others in order to do that, or we cheat them and so forth. And so this is really why it is identified or sort of listed as one of the 5 aggregates, is because it acts as a main cause of our cyclic existence. It's a primary kind of factor in our engaging in actions and our accumulating karma, doing virtuous and non-virtuous kinds of actions. And then we have the sort of these 5 aggregates, that of discrimination or discernment. And so this is really one of the basis of engaging in debate. We need to be able to have this sort of factor of identifying this is this and that is that and so forth. And this is this sort of discernment is an important element in terms of refuting the idea that there is some sort of creator or someone else that is determining what happens to us. It's not the fact that there is some sort of creator God or someone that is causing us to, say, be born in the hell realms or be born in the heavenly realms and so forth. We can't be sort of taken to different parts of cyclic existence due to someone else, but rather it is by our own kind of making these sorts of discernments of thinking, well, I want to have happiness, and so therefore I'm going to do this, and I don't want to suffer, and so therefore we're going to do that. And so in this way, this again is one of the most important sort of mental factors that drives our existence in cyclic existence, due to sort of identifying things as in a particular way based upon our feelings. We're then driven to engage in actions, and those actions lead us to then take rebirth within samsara and so forth. And so here, where it says that this, like sort of examining the aggregates kind of summarize as an object that includes all phenomena. So here, this is really referring to all composite phenomena. Non-compounded phenomena can't be sort of summarized within the 5 aggregates. But when we talk about, so we have consciousness and then we have form, in terms of an individual person that is designated on a set of aggregates, there's their physical form. But when we talk about the form aggregate, this can refer to all external phenomena, all kinds of external objects that we have, sounds and sights and smells and so forth. So this is general sort of name given to everything that has physicality in the world. And then, so again, all composite phenomena can be sort of summarized or put into these 5 aggregates, but not non-compounded phenomena. But so when we begin to examine then the aggregates, really look in and investigate them, we see that, well, we might have this sense of there being some kind of permanent, autonomous, singular self, but there's no way that such a self could exist because it's contingent, it's dependent upon all of these things. It's dependent upon causes and conditions. It's dependent upon various different things in such a way that it precludes it being autonomous or having its own kind of existence, true existence. Yeah. So here, then again, in terms of setting the mind closely on the mental and physical aggregates, this is also similar to the practice of the 4, and sometimes there's various translations, but close placements of mindfulness. So the mindfulness of body includes meditating on the body being unclean and so forth, looking at how it is in the nature of suffering and so forth. And then the meditation on feelings, this close mindfulness mindfulness of feelings, is recognizing how our feelings, our desire for happiness and our desire not to suffer, brings forth the kind of sufferings of samsara, how it is that our engagement in that way brings forth those kinds of sufferings. And then there is looking at the close mindfulness of mind, recognizing how our mind is impermanent, it's changing moment to moment and so forth. These are various kinds of ways that we can investigate or engage with these objects. And then there is the close placement of a mindfulness on phenomena, looking at all phenomena and recognizing that they don't have any kind of inherent existence or any sort of self. So here then looking beyond so here we have it listed, the aggregates, but we can variously examine this sort of object includes examining the sort of the 5 aggregates, as well as looking at what we sometimes call this this sort of 12 so sorry, we've got the 6 objects of our senses. Then we have the 6 sense bases. So those two together, we sometimes talk about in a set of 12. And then when we add on the 6 consciousnesses, we then have a set of 18. So here, the 6 objects, we have our visual objects, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, those tangible things, and then phenomena, which include objects of mind. So here, whereas before in a sort of category of form, it hadn't included non-compounded phenomena, this sort of categorization of phenomena actually includes non-compounded phenomena, because here in this category of objects of mind, which I'm translating as phenomena, that also includes uncompounded phenomena, anything that could be taken as an object of mind. So we have those 6 sense bases, our eye, or I guess I should say sense powers. So the visual sense power, our auditory sense power, our nasal smell sense power, our tongue, and then our body. And those in turn have consciousnesses that go with that. So we have a visual consciousness, an auditory consciousness, our nasal consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mental consciousness. And so again, this then allows us, we have these objects of 6 types, those that can be taken by the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and the powers, which are the basis for then generating consciousness as a visual consciousness and so forth. So when we talk about this being in a set of 12, it's including the 6 objects, those being visual forms. And again, all of these are types of form other than the objects of mind. So when we're talking about visual things, sound is also form, smell is form, our tastes are form, and the body, obviously tangible things, are form. And then this sort of mental mind, that we have our mental sense power, and then the mental sense consciousness on top of that. That includes all of those various types of mind. So this categorization of these 18 constituents is sometimes how it's translated, does encompass all phenomena. So here, when we are investigating the mental and physical aggregates, if we look at the 5 aggregates, this is mainly really investigating consciousnesses. We have our form aggregate, and then there are the 3 aggregates that deal with sort of mental factors or the mind. And when we have this sense that our self is this sort of solid thing, when we investigate the mind and these various mental functions and so forth, that dissipates this idea that there could be such a solid sort of self or a solid kind of I. And so the investigation of the 5 aggregates is primarily focusing on the sort of consciousness and those mental processes. That's sort of stronger than the sort of form element, which is just our physical form. But when we are looking at the 18 constituents, when we look at it sort of the characterization of phenomena in that rubric, we see that it's more heavy on the form side, because of those 6 objects, 5 of them are form, other than phenomena or the objects of our mind. All of the rest of those are form, as well as when we turn to the actual physical sense powers, those are form as well. And then obviously we have the various consciousnesses that arise from them, and there are those 6 consciousnesses. But in terms of those 18 constituents, the more heavy sort of emphasis is on looking at various types of form and seeing how those are not sort of established in the way that they appear to us. Whereas when we are investigating the 5 aggregates, the emphasis is more on the various types of consciousness and recognizing that those don't have any kind of true existence. So here again, when we're coming to actualizing serenity, there are these 3 objects mentioned here, which is looking at the fact that these scriptures of the Buddha can be summarized as all leading to suchness, that they will lead to suchness, and that they have led to suchness. And then there is placing the mind closely on the mental and physical aggregates, or the 12, the object and the sense powers, or the 18 constituents. And then third, there is another way to place the mind on an object of the image of the Buddha. So here, one can begin by having observed a sort of object, a Buddha's body, in some sort of form, a statue or whatever, or maybe one's lama, one's teacher, has given a description of this, of how one should meditate on the body of the Buddha. But once one has sort of stabilized the mind, one is able to call up this image of the Buddha, or have that good sort of placement on that, we should be recognizing that we're not just sort of calling up an image, a sort of static image, but recognizing this as being the actual Buddha, having a sense of this being the real the real Buddha, that the Buddha was an actual person who lived in India and actually actualized enlightenment and so forth. So once we have created that level of stability, it would be ideal to have this sense of this being a real and actual Buddha in front of us. And that kind of practice, that kind of meditation has a great deal of benefit for recalling the Buddha at the time of one's death and so forth. So here from the King of Meditative Stabilization Sutra, it says, "With his body gold in color, the Lord of the universe is extremely beautiful. The bodhisattva who places his mind on this object is referred to as one in meditative absorption." So in this way, we place the mind on the object of your one's choice, whatever one may be doing, whether it is looking at all of the teachings of the Buddha as leading to suchness, whether it is something like meditating on the aggregates and constituents, or doing the 4 close placements of mindfulness, or taking the object of a Buddha's body. One should place the mind repeatedly and continuously on that object. So having placed the mind in this way, we should examine it and check whether it is properly focused on the object. Also, check for dullness and see whether the mind is being distracted to external objects. So here we need to investigate and examine whether we are having a kind of laxity or dullness arise, or a kind of excitement, this sort of mind that isn't able to focus on the object because it's distracted away to all kind of external things. So when it comes to engaging in this kind of meditation, developing serenity, one needs to hold on to the object with a kind of clarity and strength. Again, it's like we're holding a bowl of some kind. We want to hold on to it tightly enough, not too tightly, but tightly enough that we're not going to drop it. If we sort of relax too much, there's the danger of it slipping out of our hand. So when we have this kind of dullness or laxity, it's almost like the mind is sort of falling into a stupor, falling asleep almost. There's a sense of like darkness and no kind of joy or desire to engage in that meditation. So that's one kind of danger that one can fall into, is having this sort of dullness. And on the other hand, one can be sort of alert and clear, but rather than falling into the trap of dullness, one could fall into the sort of other extreme of excitement, where out of desire, attachment, the mind is distracted away to all kinds of objects. So these are the two main obstacles that one is trying to check for and eliminate when they arise. So here, again, one should be checking the mind to see whether it's you have any kind of dullness or any kind of excitement. So if the mind is found to be dull due to sleepiness and lethargy, or if you fear that dullness is approaching. So here, when we have kind of the characteristics of this dullness are sort of like heaviness of mind. We don't have the sort of lightness and sort of agility, but rather there's this strong sort of heaviness, sleepiness, and a danger of like losing clarity and losing the object altogether. So if we suspect that we are having dullness, or we have recognized that we are experiencing this kind of dullness, we need to then apply the proper sort of antidote to that. I mean, it talks about the mind attending to a supremely delightful object. But here, in order to be able to recognize that we have dullness approaching, we need to have this power of introspection. So introspection and mindfulness are our main sort of tools to deal with the various faults, including dullness and excitement. So it's like a spy, like looking, am I properly sort of holding the object, or has my mind slipped into this kind of heaviness, dullness, sleepiness? Is the clarity of my attention good? Is the strength of my holding to that object proper? And so this is the way in which we are able to correct those kinds of things. If one is lacking in introspection, then you aren't aware that you have this kind of dullness approaching and aren't able to properly apply the antidote. So we need to have this kind of awareness, this introspection, to be able to recognize when the mind is falling into that dullness or when it is becoming too excited. So here, when we are holding an object in meditation, we need to have this factor of like clarity. The object needs to be very clear to us, and it needs to also have a sort of strength. So there needs to be within the mind holding this a kind of clarity as well as a strength of holding to that object, a sort of vividness or alertness with respect to that object. Again, it's like our hand holding on to a bowl. We need to have the proper sort of amount of tension of holding that object. And when we begin to lose that, we are then falling into this kind of dullness. When we decrease the sort of clarity and vividness, strength of our holding that object. So we can talk about sort of three different levels of dullness. The first would be actually the most subtle kind of dullness, which is when we begin to use that sort of vividness of our grasping onto the object. So although there is still a kind of clarity, the strength of that of our mind holding the object has decreased somewhat, such that we aren't sort of holding it in that proper kind of way with this like alertness or sort of vividness to it. There is a kind of clarity, but we've sort of decreased the vividness. And then there is a sort of middling level of this kind of dullness, wherein, again, we have lost more and more of our kind of clarity, as well as this alertness or vividness of holding the object. And so here, when we just sort of have a trace of that left, we haven't fully like fallen asleep or fallen into completely coarse dullness. This is a kind of middling level of dullness. And when we start to slip into the place where we no longer have any kind of clarity to this, we're not really holding it with any sort of vividness or any kind of strength at all, but basically are falling into sleep, essentially. This would be a kind of coarse dullness, the most sort of coarse or gross form of laxity or dullness that one could have. You're basically almost not even meditating anymore. So here we need to have a kind of awareness when we are meditating. If we are meditating in a way where we are sort of like lacking in the kind of clarity of our object or the sort of vividness, we need to recognize that this there's this danger that we have dullness sort of creeping in. We're not really well focused on the object, and there's a danger of it's like slipping into sleep almost, or just not having a good meditation with that. And on the other hand, we can also have where the mind is sort of alert and aware, and but the sort of strength of our holding the object is not very good because we're not very well focused on it. Our mind might be sort of very awake, but it's easily distracted away to other things. We're not able to be focused or sort of pulled properly toward the object. So in order to recognize when this is arising, whether it is dullness kind of creeping in, or whether it is this kind of excitement wherein the mind is not staying properly on the object, it takes having this factor of introspection, of being able to see and be aware of what is happening within the mind that allows us to counteract those kinds of issues.
Oh yeah, Tandra.
So here, if you fear that dullness is approaching, or you find that the mind is in this kind of dull state, then the mind should attend to a supremely delightful object, such as an image of the Buddha, or a notion of light. So here, if we are finding ourselves sinking into this kind of dullness, where we feel that here we should recognize the presence of dullness when the mind cannot see the object very clearly. When you feel as if you are blind or in a dark place, or that you cannot, or that you have closed your eyes. So this is kind of describing the state of dullness. If we feel like we are sort of blind or totally wandering in the dark, or falling into this kind of sleepiness, then one needs to apply the proper antidote. And if we are able to, we can say, think of the body of a Buddha, and that should sort of uplift the mind, or think about a notion of light, like thinking about the sun, imagining something, a strong kind of light. If that doesn't work, we can also sort of get up and splash cold water on our face too. There are other methods for like waking yourself up when you notice this kind of dullness within the mind. And then if while you are in meditation, your mind chases after qualities of external objects, such as form, or turns its attention to other phenomena, or is distracted by desire for an object you have previously experienced, or you suspect that distraction is approaching, then it suggests that we reflect that all composite phenomena are impermanent. So here, in terms of when we are dealing with dullness, having something to like uplift the mind, something like the body of a Buddha or this notion of light can help to uplift and bring back our sort of clarity of mind. When it comes to having excitement, where we are getting distracted away from the object that we want to meditate on, here it suggests that we can meditate on impermanence. That kind of mind of excitement is getting distracted to things that we find desirable. So if we think about things like impermanence or suffering, that can act as an antidote to that kind of desire that is drawing our mind to all sorts of external objects. It's also highly advisable to meditate on the breath as an antidote to this kind of distractibility, or being having this kind of excitement. So if we are trying to do some kind of meditation and we're really not able to focus, where our mind is going here and there and all over the place, sometimes it may be necessary to totally set aside that meditation and try it again later. But bringing the mind to the breath and following it as we count can be a very good way. So like breathing in and out 1, in and out 2, and so forth. That can really help to bring our minds back to the object we're trying to stay focused upon. So when it comes to dullness, we need to increase the kind of joy, excitement of the mind, lift it up somewhat, whether that's through thinking about the Buddha's body, or through thinking about light, or even splashing our faces with cold water. When we have this sense that we're like in the darkness, sort of almost like we're blind and kind of wandering with our eyes closed or something. And then when our mind is wandering, when we have the other extreme of having excitement, whether it's thinking about things that we desire or thinking about all the work that we need to do, planning ahead for the future, those kinds of things. We need to do something that will help us sort of generate disillusion with that, a kind of revulsion toward that. So thinking about impermanence or thinking about suffering to sort of bring ourselves back down from that kind of excitement of the mind. So reflecting that all composite phenomena are impermanent, we should think about dukkha and so forth, topics that will temper the mind, that will bring us back down a little bit. And again, if we aren't able to do this through some sort of contemplation of things being impermanent, if they're not really having the sort of essence that we imbue them with, we can again turn to the breath. The breath can be an extremely helpful object when we are suffering from this kind of excitement. And so for stabilizing our minds, it's extremely beneficial to do this. We can do it in a way where we are like just focusing, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, without even counting, just being with the breath. Or we can engage in that kind of counting up to 10 or whatever it may be. But when it comes to focusing on the breath, it's a nice object because it's right there. We can't really lose it. It won't dissipate or disappear for us in the way that, say, impermanence or some other like conceptual topic that we are reflecting on might go away when we get distracted away. So here, this is the kind of method that is recommended when we have strong excitement, to pull the mind back in, keep it drawn in by focusing on the breath. Whereas when we have that kind of dullness, we need to lift it up. So here, then, when it comes to engaging in this process, distractions should be eliminated with the rope of mindfulness and alertness. And this, the elephant-like mind should be fastened to the tree of the object of meditation. So here, when we are engaging in meditation, our mind is sort of like an elephant. Now, there's some sort of movies where we can see elephants who have been trained or have been tamed. And unfortunately, this is done through a process of, like, say, using various sorts, not like weapons, but like, chaining them up and making them do what we want by sort of punishing them if they don't. And so here, when it comes to our mind, we need to sort of treat it as we would an elephant that we are trying to train to, say, be a circus elephant, that we are able to keep it sort of tied to the object with mindfulness and be and have this sort of alertness that when we are giving rise to dullness, getting into this sort of sleepy or depressed mode of mind where there's a lack of clarity and alertness, we're able to lift that up. And when we are getting distracted away, we recognize that and are able to draw the mind back in. So when we are able to do this, we begin by being able to recognize when dullness and excitement are arising, and we apply the proper antidotes. But as we go along with time, with practice, we get to a point where the sort of danger of giving rise to dullness and excitement is less than, say, are over-analyzing, overlooking for these kinds of faults. So, for example, when we are able to, at a certain point, when we have trained for a long time, place the mind as we wish for, say, hours upon an object, we are examining, seeing that there is no sort of dullness, there is no sort of excitement, there's a point at which we need to then be able to abide in this kind of equanimity. So it says, when you find that the mind is free of dullness and excitement, and that it naturally abides on the object, you should relax your effort and remain neutral as long as it continues thus. So we need to have introspection and mindfulness to be able to get the mind to really stay placed, focused properly upon the object. But when we have gotten to a certain level level of skill, we need to then sort of relax such that we're not overanalyzing, overlooking for faults in our meditation. And when we then get to a point, and this then is described as what we should understand as being the actualization of serenity, is that you should understand that serenity is actualized when you enjoy physical and mental pliancy through prolonged familiarity with the meditation, and the mind gains the power to engage the object as it chooses. So when we are able to place the mind on an object for as long as we wish without experiencing any sort of difficulty in our physical body or mentally, then should be seen as like the measure of achieving serenity. So here, then following the actualization of serenity, one should follow with the pursuit of special insight. It's logical, it's right to pursue this. And so here, again, it says, after realizing serenity, meditate on insight, thinking as follows. All of the teachings of the Buddha are perfect teachings, and they directly or indirectly reveal and lead to suchness with utmost clarity. So here, for us as ordinary beings, there's a discrepancy between the way that things appear to us and the way that they actually exist. And the Buddha teaches in a way that the way that things appear and explains this sort of discordance between the way that things appear and the way that they actually exist. And if one is to understand suchness, you will be free of all the nets of wrong views, just as darkness is dispelled when light appears. So in this way, we can see that our ordinary way of thinking is mistaken. We see certain things as being desirable or undesirable, and see some things as having faults and some things as having benefits. And our pursuing after them just causes us to create more suffering. And so, sort of directly or indirectly, all of the teachings of the Buddha are trying to lead us toward an understanding of suchness, an understanding of the way that things actually exist. It's trying to get us to a meditation and understanding of the ultimate nature of phenomena. And through that, our ignorance is removed. This idea that we have of there being some kind of an autonomous self or an autonomous I that exists from its own side without depending upon anything else. The teachings of the Buddha help us to undermine that kind of grasping at such a self. And so too, the way that we normally hold those things that we designate as pleasant or unpleasant as existing from their own side, a proper understanding of emptiness undermines, reverses all of that grasping that we have toward a phenomena. So the wisdom realizing emptiness is what cuts the root of cyclic existence. And if we don't have that, there's no way that we can get ourselves out of samsara. So here, mere serenity meditation cannot purify pristine awareness, nor can it eliminate the darkness of obscurations. So here we should recognize that no matter how much we sort of develop our meditative stabilization through our practice of serenity, there's no way that we can develop this fully purified wisdom, this wisdom that is purified from any of the obscurations or afflictions, if we don't pursue this kind of special insight or superior insight. So recognizing this, we give rise to a sort of desire, putting in effort to be able to actualize such an insight. And so we don't want to be like those kind of yogis who end up pursuing these higher levels of meditative concentration. Like, for example, those that see the faults of the desire realm are more coarse kind of objects of desire. And so they pursue a birth in the form or formless realms all the way up to the peak of samsara. They can reach these really high states, but no matter how stable that meditative stabilization, once the karma for that expires, they're going to have to fall back down. So even so here there's a quotation that says that, like, even if we don't obtain the actual kind of meditative stabilizations, the teachings of the Buddha will avert samsara. So we aren't seeking out a life as, say, like a long-lived God, wherein we have have this extraordinarily stable meditative stabilization, but it's going to eventually end. And we have done nothing to undermine the causes of samsara. So here it says, when I meditate properly on suchness with wisdom, pristine awareness will be purified, or will develop this kind of wisdom that is purified from any obscuration. Only with wisdom can I realize suchness. Only with wisdom can I effectively eradicate obscurations. Therefore, engaging in serenity meditation, I shall search for suchness with wisdom. So once we've gained serenity, there's this desire to go on and develop special insight. And I shall not remain content with serenity alone. So we have come to the end of our time for today, so we will leave it there and then pick up with this next section saying, what is suchness like? It is the nature of all phenomena that ultimately are empty of the self of a person and self of phenomena. That's where we will pick up next time.